The 4 decades of rock on 106.1 Rock Radio. All this week, the 70s. Prog, punk, and power cuts. Today, the movies.
Jaws changed cinema, didn't it? It changed the way that movies were marketed. It changed the way that movies were distributed. I didn't realise that before Jaws, Duel was Spielberg's first movie, wasn't it? With Dennis Weaver. That's a great movie as well.
Yeah.
But I didn't realise that before Jaws, films would tour around the United States and then they would go off around the rest of the world. Jaws opened on 400 screens on the same day.
I think the second half of the 70s is about a return to fantasy. You see that with a lot of the films that sort of cross over there. You've got Jaws and Close Encounters and Star Wars and Superman at the back end of the 70s, but you've also got Saturday Night Fever and Grease in there as well. So something went on where people wanted a bit more of an escape, I guess. But for Spielberg, his movie was mass marketed, but it wasn't because of Jaws. There's a fascinating thing that goes on here, and I think it's Star Wars that changes cinema here because it's Fox. Well, let me give you 2 figures here. In 1967, Fox made Dr. Dolittle, and it was supposed to cost $6 million, and it cost $18 million to make. 10 years later, Star Wars was made for a budget of $8 million. Now, you think about that, right? There's a $10 million deficit there. And Dr. Dolittle, well, actually, it made reasonable money, but not if you've spent $18 million making the thing. And it bombed, and it hurt Fox. It almost killed them, in fact. And the whole thing about movies up until that point is they had been bankrolled by 2 things. By doing this tour thing that you mentioned, and by merchandising. And after Dr. Dolittle tanked, it changed everything. And they started just doing it wide because it was the only way to just get money in quick. Now, a fascinating thing about Star Wars is because of all that and because of 10 years of depression, George Lucas was able to go to Fox and say, give me this budget, but I won't take any money, first up, in order to keep the costs down. Just what I want is a couple of percentage points of the profit. And they thought, well, this is some silly space movie. It's never going to make anything. You can have that. Oh, and I want the merchandising rights as well. I want to own the ability to do whatever. And Dr. Dolittle's merchandising had failed. Fox hadn't done it for 10 years. So they were happy to hand that over as well. Well, and the rest is history. Lucas is the man he is and made the impact he did because he had massive control as soon as they started churning out all of that merchandising.
I've been waiting for you, Obi-Wan. We meet again at last. The circle is now complete. When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master.
Only a master of evil, Darth.
At this time, directors were using popular music, using rock music, especially someone like Scorsese, who's obviously, I mean, his first gig was the Woodstock Festival, wasn't it? That was the first professional job Martin Scorsese ever had as an assistant director. And right through his movies, through the 70s, and right through his career, he would use music, mainly rock music, almost exclusively rock music, to evoke a period and a situation and to accompany somebody getting horribly and brutally murdered.
Yeah, well, I mean, hey, look, no trick goes uncopied, does it? Tarantino absolutely nicked it outrageously come the 90s. I think that it's a great melding of the 2 arts, and I think they're just perfect, aren't they? I mean, music, we love it because it makes us feel something. It's a very simple but very true art form. It just gets inside your bones, it fires your blood. You match that with some of the most impressive images that were beginning to come out, and Scorsese is, of course, a great example of that with his output, especially in the 70s, because the second you hear that tune again, whatever it is, you cannot divorce it from the images that were burned on the back of your retina at the same point.
Dun 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 dun. You can't hear it, can you, without looking behind you, even if you're walking down the street in Salford, to see if there isn't a great white shark sneaking up on you.
It is as if God created the devil and gave him jaws.
That's John Williams, of course, and the man is an absolute marvel. He would go on to transform the sound of Lucas's silly little space opera into something just majestic. I think there's a lot about the fact that John Williams' orchestral score for the whole of the Star Wars trilogy convinced us that actually we were watching something of incredible importance, of majestic status. Well, I'm certain without it, it's not half the film that we now perceive it to be.
I think the 70s is when directors, particularly, start to use popular music wonderfully, brilliantly, to evoke a particular emotion or to generate a particular kind of feeling within the audience.
You get all the fantasy stuff, so you get Superman and Close Encounters and Star Wars, you get all of that with a big orchestra, but mostly brass. That's the key. If you use brass, for some reason we all now, I don't know whether we were taught to do it in the late 70s, but we all think space. But then you've got some dark stuff again. You've got the Deer Hunter and Apocalypse Now and sort of the dark end to the decade. And then even Ridley Scott's Alien, which is 1979. What I love about Alien is it's sort of a blend of all three, really. It's fantasy, technically, because it's sci-fi, but it's also horror. It's Ridley Scott, a great British director, but it's also an incredibly artful movie, made on a budget, as much of the 70s was, but just with an eerie soundtrack.
What's wrong? Just what?
Serious?
Hey, what's the matter?
Hold down! Hold it down. Let her. Get this one! Well, come on!
Damn, what do we do?
Shoot it! Hold him down. Damn it! See, get it into his mouth! I'm trying!